World War II left Germany in ruins. The once bustling cities were now reduced to rubble, and the infrastructure lay in tatters. The human cost was staggering, with millions dead and countless others displaced. The once mighty nation was defeated and occupied. The German military, once feared across Europe, was now a shadow of its former self, and the people faced an uncertain future under the watchful eyes of the occupying forces. The victors, the United States, Great Britain, France, and the Soviet Union, divided Germany into 4 zones. This division was meant to ensure that Germany could never again become a threat to world peace. Each zone was governed by one of the Allied powers, with the hope that cooperation would lead to a stable and peaceful Europe. Berlin, though located deep within the Soviet zone, was also divided. The city was split into 4 sectors, mirroring the division of the country. This unique situation made Berlin a focal point of Cold War tensions. This division would have profound consequences. Families and friends found themselves separated by political boundaries, and the city became a microcosm of the larger ideological struggle between East and West. The wartime alliance between East and West quickly dissolved. Suspicion and mistrust grew. The ideological differences that had been set aside during the war now came to the forefront, leading to a deepening rift. The United States and its allies promoted democracy and capitalism in West Germany. Through initiatives like the Marshall Plan, they aimed to rebuild the economy and create a prosperous, free society. The Soviet Union established a communist regime in East Germany. The government controlled all aspects of life, and dissent was not tolerated. The contrast between the 2 Germanys became increasingly stark. 2 different ideologies, 2 opposing systems now stood face to face. The democratic West and the communist East were in a constant state of tension, each side wary of the other's intentions. The economic disparity between the 2 Germanys was stark. West Germany, with its vibrant economy and modern infrastructure, stood in sharp contrast to the austere and struggling East. West Germany, aided by the Marshall Plan, experienced an economic boom. The country quickly rebuilt, and its citizens enjoyed a high standard of living with access to consumer goods and a thriving job market. East Germany, under Soviet control, struggled. The economy was stagnant and shortages of basic goods were common. The government's focus on heavy industry left little room for consumer needs. Millions of East Germans fled to the West, seeking freedom and opportunity. The flow of refugees was a clear indication of the dissatisfaction with life under the communist regime. This mass exodus embarrassed the East German government and threatened its very existence. The loss of skilled workers and professionals was a significant blow to the economy and the state's legitimacy. By the late 1950s, the situation in Berlin had reached a boiling point. Protests and demonstrations became more frequent, and the tension at the border crossings was palpable. The flow of refugees through Berlin was a major point of contention. Something had to give. The East German government, with the backing of the Soviet Union, decided to take drastic measures. The construction of the Berlin Wall was a dramatic and tragic response to this crisis. The wall not only physically divided the city, but also symbolized the deep ideological divide that had come to define the Cold War era. Families were torn apart, and the dream of a united Germany seemed more distant than ever. The construction of the Berlin Wall was not simply the result of abstract historical forces. It was a tangible manifestation of the Cold War tensions that had been simmering for years, a physical barrier that symbolized the ideological divide between East and West. It was the product of decisions made by men, each with their own motivations and ambitions. These leaders were not just reacting to events, they were actively shaping the course of history with their choices. 3 figures loom large in this story: Nikita Khrushchev, John F. Kennedy, and Walter Ulbricht. Their interactions and decisions would define the fate of Berlin and, by extension, the Cold War itself.
The flood of refugees from East Germany was a propaganda disaster. It was a clear indication that people were voting with their feet, fleeing the communist regime in search of freedom and better opportunities in the West. The wall would stop the flow and secure the Soviet bloc. It was seen as a necessary measure to maintain control and prevent the further erosion of communist influence in Eastern Europe.
Nikita Khrushchev, the leader of the Soviet Union, was a shrewd and ruthless politician. He was determined to assert Soviet dominance and saw the Berlin Wall as a strategic move to solidify his position. He saw the Berlin Wall as a necessary measure to protect Soviet interests. For Khrushchev, the wall was not just a barrier, it was a statement of power and control.
The wall is an offense against history. It stands as a stark reminder of the division and conflict that define our times. We vow to defend West Berlin, but we must avoid direct confrontation with the Soviet Union. Our goal is to maintain peace and stability while standing firm against aggression.
John F. Kennedy, the young and charismatic President of the United States, found himself thrust into the center of this crisis. His leadership and decisions during this period would be crucial in navigating the delicate balance of power. He condemned the wall as an offense against history. Kennedy's speeches resonated with people around the world, highlighting the moral and ideological battle at the heart of the Cold War. Kennedy understood the symbolic importance of Berlin. He knew that the city's fate was intertwined with the broader struggle between democracy and communism. He vowed to defend West Berlin, but he also sought to avoid a direct confrontation with the Soviet Union. Kennedy's approach was one of measured resolve, aiming to protect freedom without escalating into full-scale war.
The wall will stem the tide of refugees and consolidate our power. It is a necessary step to ensure the stability and future of our socialist state.
Walter Ulbricht, the hardline communist leader of East Germany, was the architect of the wall. His vision for East Germany was one of strict control and unwavering loyalty to the Soviet Union. He saw it as a way to stem the tide of refugees and consolidate his power. For Ulbricht, the wall was a tool to enforce his authority and prevent the collapse of his regime. Ulbricht's decision to build the wall would have a profound impact on the lives of millions of Germans. Families were torn apart, and the city of Berlin became a symbol of the broader Cold War struggle. The wall stood as a testament to the lengths that leaders would go to maintain their power and control. The construction of the Berlin Wall in 1961 was not a sudden event. It was a dramatic and visible manifestation of the deep-seated ideological and political rift that had been growing for years between the East and the West. This wall was the culmination of years of escalating tensions and crises, a physical barrier that symbolized the Iron Curtain descending across Europe. The seeds of division were sown in the aftermath of World War II. Berlin, once the vibrant capital of Germany, lay in ruins, a stark reminder of the devastation of war. The city was divided into 4 occupation zones, each controlled by one of the Allied powers: the United States, the United Kingdom, France, and the Soviet Union. The Berlin blockade of 1948–49 was an early sign of the Cold War to come. This was a critical moment when the Soviets attempted to cut off all ground access to West Berlin, hoping to force the Western Allies out of the city. After the war, the Western powers unified their occupation zones in Germany, both economically and politically. This move was seen as a direct challenge to Soviet influence in the region. The Soviets saw this unification as a threat and responded with the Berlin blockade, an attempt to isolate West Berlin and force the Allies to abandon the city. They cut off all land access to West Berlin, hoping to starve the city into submission. Roads, railways, and canals were blocked, leaving the city isolated and vulnerable. The Western Allies responded with the Berlin Airlift, a massive humanitarian effort that supplied West Berliners with food, fuel, and other essential goods for almost a year. American and British planes flew around the clock, delivering thousands of tons of supplies each day. The blockade was a failure for the Soviets, but it solidified the division of Berlin. The city became a focal point of Cold War tensions, a place where East and West confronted each other directly. Throughout the 1950s, tensions continued to rise. The ideological battle between communism and capitalism played out in the streets of Berlin, with each side trying to assert its dominance. The East German government, facing economic stagnation and mass emigration, became increasingly repressive. Many East Germans fled to the West in search of better opportunities and freedom, creating a brain drain that further weakened the East. Escape routes from East to West Berlin were gradually closed off. The East German authorities tightened their grip, making it more difficult for people to flee to the West. By 1961, the situation was untenable. The flow of refugees from East to West had reached crisis levels, and the East German government was desperate to stem the tide. On August 13, 1961, East German troops began sealing off the border between East and West Berlin. Barbed wire and barricades were quickly erected, cutting off the flow of people and goods. The Berlin Wall, a symbol of Cold War division, was born. Over the following days and weeks, the temporary barriers were replaced with concrete walls, watchtowers, and guard posts. The wall stood as a stark reminder of the division of Europe and the ideological battle that defined the Cold War era. The construction of the Berlin Wall was a massive undertaking. It began overnight. East German troops, backed by construction workers, moved with astonishing speed. Barbed wire fences were erected first, followed by concrete walls, watchtowers, and guard dogs. The wall stretched for miles, cutting through the very heart of Berlin. The wall was not just a physical barrier. It was a sophisticated system of control and repression. The Death Strip, a heavily guarded no-man's land, ran along the eastern side of the wall. It was designed to prevent escape attempts. Guard towers, equipped with machine guns and floodlights, were positioned at regular intervals. The construction of the wall had a devastating impact on the people of Berlin. Families and friends were separated overnight. What was once a porous border, relatively easy to cross, was now an impenetrable barrier. The wall became a symbol of oppression and division, a stark reminder of the human cost of the Cold War.